Hi, I'm Pastor Don Milton. Join me for a discussion of one of my favorite Christmas carols, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. The words to this hymn were written at a time of great spiritual revival. That era is referred to as the Great Awakening. And Hark the Herald Angels Sing was written by Charles Wesley. Or was it? The fact is, the two most famous polygamists of the 1700s may be responsible for the lines that transformed this hymn into one of the most famous Christmas carols of all time. In 1739, John and Charles Wesley, the founders of the Methodist denomination, published a hymnal titled Songs and Sacred Poems. This is where Charles' hymn first appeared by another name, and the words by which we know the hymn today were not included. In fact, those words may actually have been written later by the polygamist Wesley Hall, who had by this time married Charles' own sister, Martha. Two other crucial lines may have been written by the Reverend Martin Madden, another polygamist who we'll discuss later. Let's begin by taking a look at the first and second lines, followed by the seventh and eighth lines. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. And the seventh and eighth lines, with angelic host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. The opening lines first appeared in a hymnal published by George Whitefield in 1753. George Whitefield was the most famous evangelist during the Great Awakening. He'd been friends with Wesley Hall and Charles Wesley at least since 1929, when Charles founded the Holy Club at Oxford. Whether it was George Whitefield or Wesley Hall who came up with the new lines for this Christmas carol is unknown. However, Wesley Hall had become George Whitefield's trusted editor for many other manuscripts, and it would make sense that Wesley Hall, whose chief ministry was poetry and editing, would be given the responsibility to smooth out the words of the various hymns that Whitefield had compiled for his hymnal. Wesley Hall did have other talents. One of them was to attract women who were happy to become one of his several wives. Martha Wesley, his first wife, was noted for her devotion to her husband, a devotion that extended to his children from other wives, as Martha was known to have nursed them as her own. The man believed to be responsible for writing the seventh and eighth lines of this hymn was Martin Madden. Here is how he came to know the Wesleys. One evening, Madden was challenged by his buddies at the local coffee house to attend a John Wesley revival and to come back and do an impression of him. Instead, he came back saved. His conversion was deep and immediate. He became a philanthropist with a group of other Christians and founded the Lock Hospital, the first charitable hospital for the treatment of women with venereal disease. It was during Madden's ministry to these broken and diseased women that he became convinced that the so-called English gentlemen who'd corrupted and abandoned them must be forced to take them as wives, and that the man's marital status should have nothing to do with the requirement. Madden believed, if this had been the case all along, that these women would never have found themselves choosing between morality and food for their babies. His beliefs on this matter are based on God's law found in Exodus 22:16. If a man seduces an unbetrothed virgin and lie with her, he must pay the bride's price, and she'll be his wife. These are the 3 volumes published in 1781 in defense of women's rights, their rights when seduced, as well as a man's God-given right to take several wives. And these are the 3 volumes that I have duplicated so that you can read the best examination of marriage in the history of mankind. On the front of the book is the illustration of the actual Lock Hospital, which Madden founded for the treatment of these cast-aside women. May I remind those with ill-conceived notions about 1 Timothy 3:2 and Titus 1:6, those verses don't prohibit men with several wives from performing certain duties in the church. Those verses give an exemption to men with several wives from appointed office. And we find a similar exemption spoken of in the following verse. Deuteronomy 24:5. When a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business, but he shall be free at home 1 year, and shall cheer up his new wife, which he has taken. The business spoken of here doesn't refer to that kind of business that provides for the support of a man's family, but of civil duties, which in the case of Israel referred to the maintenance of the temple and the theocratic government. And Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus specifically refer to the appointed offices of elder, bishop, and deacon for this exemption. Though Madden was a rich man, his walk with the Lord was tested more than most ministers. As if the horror of disease and death that he witnessed daily at the Lock Hospital was not enough, he was tested more when his 12-year-old son died. In an elegy to his son, Madden wrote, "He stood confessed his parents' joy and pride, nor ever caused them grief, but when he died." Weeks before his son's death, Madden had completed his second hymnal. This time it included melodies for which his chapel had become famous, over 100 of them, and he'd composed more than 30 of them himself. He'd founded a hospital for neglected women and a chapel next door. His hymnal complete, and his son now dead. I'm sure he would have had no objection had the Lord wanted to take him home right then. But there was one small detail we can't ignore. Little 3-year-old Samuel Wesley. Charles Wesley had named Madden godfather to his son, and Samuel was blessed by God with a joy and a genius talent that filled Madden's hours. These Wesley traits that Samuel had inherited, combined with Madden's doting, produced a child prodigy, so much so that Samuel was referred to as the English Mozart. By the time he was 8, Samuel had composed an oratorio, Ruth. Years later, little Samuel, now a man, took himself 2 wives. The following is what he wrote prior to getting a legally contracted marriage to his first wife. "She is truly and properly my wife by all the laws of God and nature. She never can be made more so by the mercenary tricks of divine jugglers, but yet if a million of ceremonies repeated myriads of times by as many successors and imitators of Simon Magus, can serve to make her more happy or more honorable, I am ready to pay them for their hocus pocus, for I am told that in this evangelical age, the gift of God is not to be purchased without money. Charles Wesley's son Samuel lived with his first wife and his second wife, Sarah Suter, during the first 2 trimesters of Sarah's pregnancy. But Samuel's first wife no longer wished to share her husband, unlike Samuel's Aunt Martha. So his first wife moved out of the residence, leaving her husband and Sarah to multiply without her. Samuel never had children with his first wife, and she didn't seek a divorce. Nonetheless, his children, all 9 of them by Sarah, his second wife, were not denied the right to carry their father's name. The first of his children, conceived in polygamy, was Samuel Sebastian Wesley, who composed the tune for one of the most famous organ hymns in church history. The church's one foundation is Jesus Christ her Lord. She is his new creation by water and the word. Now back to Hark the Herald Angels Sing. As Charles had originally written the words, the hymns didn't have any lyrical hooks, but in Whitefield's 1753 hymnal, the cumbersome first line, "Hark how all the welkin rings," yes, you heard it right, welkin, W-E-L-K-I-N. Do you even know what a welkin is? I'll leave it to you to look it up. But the first line was replaced with, "Hark the herald angels sing," and the perfectly acceptable line, "Glory to the King of Kings," was changed to, "Glory to the newborn King." Changing it to "newborn King" forever changed it from a hymn for all seasons into a Christmas carol, and it soon became a favorite. To date, we have no proof that Whitefield changed the words. It would make sense that his friend Wesley Hall, the husband to several wives, penned those words which we still use today. He was friend and brother-in-law to Charles Wesley and George Whitefield's editor. His prowess with the pen was indisputable. The following is a sample of his talent in his elegy to his own son, who, like Madden's, had died at a tender age. Witness his ardent one desire to live, if spared, for God alone, but rather with a tuneful choir, to join in songs around his throne. He grasps on earth the prize above, and all his soul is prayer and love. To the modern reader, this may sound a bit vague, but to anyone who's lost a son, these few lines read several times can provide a healing salve, for they speak of the child who once spoke with faith, but now sings in heaven by God's grace. Madden's purported addition to Hark the Herald Angels Sing appeared in his first hymnal, published in 1760, just 7 years after Whitefield's was published. And Madden's hymnal included 2 new lines. These were substituted for the 7th and 8th lines of the original hymn. With angelic host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. The lines substituted in Whitefield's and then Madden's hymnals are the most memorable lines in the hymn. And if the earlier change to Newborn King weren't enough to make this a Christmas carol, the addition of Christ is born in Bethlehem to the 8th line certainly did. But for Madden, words were not enough. Madden had long shown himself a descendant of Jubal, the father of all such as handle the harp and organ, and Madden's second hymnal had tunes to go with the words, and this is an understatement. His hymnal included ornate hymns from a variety of composers. As I've already stated, nearly a third of these hymns, out of 100+ hymns, were composed by Madden himself. And by the time Madden died in 1790, 21 years after the publication of this second hymnal, it had become the most popular hymnal with melodies in the world. From his musical chapel, after which Chapel Street in London was named, he mainstreamed the singing of hymns into the congregations as no person had ever done. He donated the profits arising from the sale of his hymnal for the benefit of the Lock Hospital, the hospital he'd helped found for the cast-aside women of his day. And the usefulness of Madden's hymnal in bringing light to an unsaved world did not end there. Whitefield had led the first Great Awakening. Now it was Madden's turn. Though he'd gone on to be with the Lord, the second Great Awakening had just begun, and it continued for 50 years. His hymnal was republished numerous times in England and shipped across the ocean to satisfy the needs of a new generation of evangelists, to reach the lost with words and melodies that turned hearts to the Lord as God's Spirit moved across a new nation. Then in 1805, Madden's hymnal was published for the first time in the United States. As for Hark the Herald Angels Sing, it is still sung today as it was then. So-called historians disagree on who was more influential in the revising of Charles Wesley's hymn. Who they favored depended mostly on whether they were aware that Whitefield's 1753 hymnal contained the carol. But I believe the answer to who changed those lines can be found in the way we look at hymn publishers. Are they the creative force like the Reverend Martin Madden? Or was Madden an exception to the rule, a hymn tune composer second only to Handel? But why would hymn publishers be any different than book publishers, glorified printing houses responsible more for the distribution than the content of what they print? So who do you think wrote the revisions to Hark the Herald Angels Sing? There's an interesting story told of Felice Giardini, the most famous violinist in England at the time of Madden, an associate of Madden, and a composer of several of the melodies of his hymnal. And it reminds us of the breach of trust committed in changing another man's work without consultation. Giardini gives an account of having made that mistake himself as follows. One night during the opera, Jomelli, who had composed it, that is the piece Giardini was playing, came into the orchestra, and setting himself close by me, I determined to give the Maestro de Capella a touch of my taste and execution. And in the symphony of the next song, which was in a pathetic style, I gave loose to my fingers and fancy, for which I was rewarded by the composer with a violent slap in the face, which was the best lesson I ever received from a great master in my life. Despite the desires of admirers of Whitefield, Madden, and Wesley Hall, and I am one of them, to suggest that they or anyone else wrote the revised version of Hark the Herald Angels Sing is to ignore the fact that these men were in constant communication. It's more likely that Charles Wesley himself handed a piece of paper to Whitefield, and then years later to Madden, requesting the changes to his hymn be made. Hark the herald Angels sing, glory to the newborn King. With angelic host proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. Till next time, may God bring you through his incarnate word, Jesus the Messiah, to a closer walk with him and an understanding of his will for your life. You'll find most of the footnotes for this video in my novel, Prince of Sumba, Husband to Many Wives. My novel contains 385 footnotes. It will be replaced in early 2023 with the 14-year anniversary issue, which will be dozens of pages longer and include a few additional characters. It will also contain dozens more footnotes and an appendix. To purchase any of my books, see the links below. If you'd like to donate or buy me a cup of coffee, there are links for that as well. And consider subscribing to this channel.